Okay.
Tell us how you got started in the movement.
I was minding my own business, just graduated from law school, spending a summer on the beach, and a friend came to the beach, actually pulled over the curtain of the shower and said, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "I'm busy."
This was what beach?
In New York, Long Island.
Okay.
And it happened that I had graduated from seminary and worked for Riverside Church for a year and knew a lot of the people in the National Council. Then I graduated from law school. And the president, as you know, Kennedy at the time, had, in the summer of '63, under pressure from King and others, began to evolve on civil rights. So he brought together a White House conference on lawyers, created the President's Committee for Civil Rights under Law. 2 presidents of the ABA were co-chairmen. And then he brought together clergy, and they, in the June of '63, the churches for the first time really committed themselves to go into civil rights. They had done nothing up to then, but they decided they go into full. So they created a commission at the National Council level, put on a staff, and they were trying to talk to the lawyers, and the lawyers had no idea what they were saying. The lawyers were trying to talk to them, and they had no idea what the lawyers were saying. So they needed a translator. So I was hired, essentially, as far as I can figure, that was my chief role. I could tell the lawyers, but what I did, frankly, was talk theology to the lawyers and law to the theologians. So I was a lousy translator. But that got me started. And then...
Where was the first place that you went?
Well, the very first place I went was to the senior partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, the biggest law firm in New York. And I got sent down there to convince them that they should not, and the legal profession should not oppose the March on Washington, which they said was a communist march. And so here I am, this pup right out of law school, and this is a guy that has argued 30 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, from the biggest law firm in the country, and I'm telling him he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I haven't the faintest idea what the hell I'm talking about. I'm really, I'm a week into this, but fortunately, they did not oppose it, and that began a relationship with them, which became very necessary when the summer of '64 came along, the Mississippi Project, because somehow you had to get all these lawyers integrated to get down in Mississippi. And I was kind of the ambassador from the legal groups there with the other lawyers that got involved. I helped create the Lawyers' Constitutional Defense Committee. Because the President's Committee finally decided they would go to the South, which was a great victory, I loved it. But they'd only represent the clergy when they were arrested. And I said, what kind of a deal is that? You're going to have 700 kids that you won't support, all the blacks you won't support, but you'll support the clergy. I mean, well, that was what they decided. So then we said, well, that won't work. So we created, the 5 civil rights organizations, created this new organization and recruited a couple of hundred lawyers who would represent the kids. And of course, when they got down there, everybody worked for, nobody paid any attention to where you came from or who you were supposed to be working for. It was a great melting pot.
How did you go around, how did you recruit the lawyers to go down?
I made speech to the bar associations. We each had, we went through the churches, making a plea for lawyers within the churches, as we did for clergy to come down. A couple of college campuses to talk to law schools to try to get their alumni, etc. And so it was, and then quickly word of mouth.
And was this after the Goodman, Schooner, and Cheney disappeared?
No, essentially.
A little before.
Essentially before. I think we were pretty well in place. Yeah, we had most of the lawyers ready to go by the time we went to Oxford.
I see. Okay. So you went to the Oxford training.
Yeah. Well, of course, the National Council actually sponsored it and put it on. And when you said in your speech that they had a lawyer that told them about, I think that was me. I may be wrong, but I mean, I did have to speak there. And
what do you tell someone when you're a lawyer and they're heading into Mississippi? What did you or what were they told?
Don't leave jail alone under any circumstance. I mean, that was the rule even before Sweeney. Do not leave jail. And I learned that. Can I back up a second?
Sure.
I learned that because in Hattiesburg. No, I'll go back. In '63, when I said I got 57 people released partly from Parchment and others. Well, the Parchment people came out, and there were 3 cars. We're 6 miles in. That was easy. The other 40, 51 were in the county jail and outside of Greenwood. And by the time we got enough cars assembled and everything, pitch black, dead of night. And we arrive in the middle of East Jesus. And one little teeny tiny light, way off there. And all these cars pull up. And I get out, and the head of the jail says, "You Pratt?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "The sheriff says you're coming. You come up, you walk slow." And so I came up and I walked, and the dogs are barking, and there's guys with shotguns. So I go inside and I present the bonds that I had brought from New York, and I said, "The sheriff has approved them." He said, "I know." And so he said, "All right." And they do whatever they do. All the cell doors open. You all can come out now. You're free to go. Not a one of them moved. Literally. None of those guys were going to come out of their cells. It's pitch black, middle of the night, and some stranger from somebody they'd never heard of, had no idea who the hell he was, is saying, "You all come on out." So they just stood there in the back of their cell. They would not move. And then there's this rickety stairway that goes up to the 2nd floor, no baluster, and a little landing. And suddenly I look up, and here are a dozen or so girls peeking out from up there. That's the women's section. And then these 2 old ladies, 87, 89, come out and stand on the stairway. And they look down. And they did something which seemed perfectly obvious to me, but in years later, I realized the courage it took them to directly confront a white man. "Who are you?" Perfectly simple question. "Who are you?" And so I said that my name is John Pratt. I'm from the National Council of Churches. I'm here with bonds, and we've released them, and you're all ready to go. And they listened. And they heard the voice, and they listened to me. And then finally, the big beaming faces, and they turned and said, "Come on, girls, we're going home. The church has come and set us free." And they whooped down the stairs, and the guys came out of their cells, and we all went back to Greenwood. But from that was even before the summer. I learned that, you do not leave us in the middle of the night, in the middle of Mississippi, by yourself. It's just, you can't do it. And so that was one of the things I said. What else I said, I don't really remember, other than, don't be confrontational. We will do everything we can to have a lawyer there within 3 hours. And we will call your congressman, which we did. We had an entire network set up so that their congressman was called, their senators were called, and they were asked, they would be told the jail and the phone number, and they would call back to that jail, the congressman something from Florida, or from Mississippi, or not Mississippi, from Illinois, and I know my constituent X is in your jail, and I just want you to know my people will be checking every day to be sure they're okay. And Senator X would call, and that made a big difference. They were watching Big Brother, and they were Big Brother. So that was one of the, we'll get lawyers to you, keep calm, don't get confrontational, that sort of stuff.
Do you think the people so you were there at the training, do you think when they had it down, do you think that training had really given them a good idea, or do you think as hard as they tried, they still didn't know?
There's no way you have a good idea. My first trip, I was so naive. I had never been in Mississippi before until I went to get these 57 people. I drove across the state by myself. I drove back at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was insane. But I didn't know any better. And these kids didn't know any better. But they had courage, and they had numbers. They had solidarity, and they had a sense of we can do it. And you were quite right. The initial, as you know, most of COFO did not want them to come at all. It was Moses really had to push to get that through. You've seen Eyes on the Prize, I assume. And when you see Stokely, who was Greenwood Suites when I knew him, that's where I first met him in Greenwood. And Stokely says, you don't pay any attention. when a black kid's murdered, you know. But when a white guy gets killed, then the whole country goes up in arms. So that's racism. And you know, to a certain extent, I think he was absolutely right. But so Kofel was totally against it, totally against it. And Moses said, we cannot pinpoint, we cannot put a bright light on Mississippi unless we do this. And were they fodder for the cannon? In one sense, sure. You know, did he have a sense? I think he did. I mean, Bob Moses and I have had our disagreements over the years, but I think he was acutely aware of how much danger he was putting his people and all those white, particularly the white kids.
Yeah.
And the fact is, if that hadn't happened the first week, you probably would have had 6 murders.
I think that, yeah.
I mean, you know, it so shocked the country and so galvanized Washington. The other thing you don't talk about, but if you were part of this whole thing, was the terrible influence of J. Edgar Hoover and the way in which he worked against everything the civil rights movement was doing almost at the end of his life, against King, against the movement people, and he had to be brought kicking and screaming into Mississippi. I mean, it was really awful.
Yeah.
But boy, when they came,
Yeah.
I remember being in Jackson, and one day, you know, you can't find an FBI agent, and the only ones that were there were they were on retainers, and they were ex-Mississippi State policemen up in Clarksdale and places like that. But the next day, here's this big office building and 4 floors of equipment, the likes of which you have never seen.
So when they did it, they did it. What other things do you remember about other legal problems that you dealt with in Mississippi that particular summer in '64?
It actually went enormously smoothly. You know, we had enough lawyers that they were everywhere, and some of them were black. I can remember at least one black assistant district attorney, I think out of Boston, and the Mississippi bar had never, had never seen a professional black lawyer. There were only 2 black lawyers in the whole state, and they had a combined legal education of 1/2 semester between the 2 of them. They were both ex-postmasters that had, you know, and the only reason they were there is because somebody in Mississippi decided we needed black lawyers, so we created these 2 wonderful guys. But they had never seen a black lawyer outduel them in a courtroom, and it was fascinating, you know. And the other lawyers were, you know, Mississippi's a nice state, but the bar is not made up of the most brilliant. I shouldn't say this. I don't know where this is going to go, but at least it wasn't back then. So, I mean, these guys just did wonderful jobs. One of my little jobs was to move cars around, because the lawyers, if the car stayed in the car, they may change lawyers, but the car was there in Clarksdale for 2 weeks. By that time, everybody in the White Citizens Council, everybody in the Klan knew the car, and so I would just pull a car from Macomb and have to take it up there, take the car from Clarksdale and put it in Meridian, put that one, you know. And so I had this gigantic chessboard of moving, I think, 30 or 40 cars from one end of the state to the other.
Your fleet. Did you feel at all in danger in any of these things?
A couple of times. We had to run a roadblock. When Macomb was bombed, the first made bomb of the freedom.
July, yeah.
And David Sweeney was, is it David Sweeney? I think it's David. That's not right. Something Sweeney.
I know.
Well, at any rate, he got a concussion.
Dennis Sweeney.
And was it?
Dennis Sweeney.
Dennis, not Dave, Dennis Sweeney. And so we drove down there and spent the whole day, and they decided they were going to have a rally that evening, and they did. We printed up the leaflets and had a rally, and we were all in attendance, etc. And then started back with Sweeney to go back, could take him to the hospital in Jackson. We had an FBI escort. For some reason that I don't remember, the FBI was out of Louisiana, out of New Orleans, and not out of Jackson. So they escorted us the first 10 miles and then turned back to go back to New Orleans. And the Klan had a pretty good network going. So at about mile 13, suddenly you saw the headlights and the roadblock up ahead. And there was a reporter from Nick von Hoffman, who was a marvelous reporter from the Chicago Sun-Times, was driving, well, he had 3 cars. He was in the second car, and I was the lead one. He came up next to me, and he goes like this. I look at him, I said, you sure? Kind of. So we hit the gas pedals, and we approached them at a little over 100 miles an hour. And, you know, they're parked just like this. And I figured, you know, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of evidence around if this thing goes off. And at the last minute, they pulled back. We went through, and then we had a 35-mile chase through the Mississippi countryside.
How did you eventually lose them?
We got into Hinds County, and they gave up for whatever reason. I mean, but I had no idea where we were. I mean, we were just going up this street and down that street and chasing down dirt roads, and it was. So that was one time. There was another time, the time at the state pen, where one of the guards decided that he didn't like me and cracked his shotgun. But that was about as close. But you know, generally, I got to say, the police establishment had enough experience. They respected lawyers, and they were off limits. Citizens may not, but in terms of law enforcement, we were, you know. The last night, I was there for most of the Hattiesburg demonstration in the spring, which, as you know, preceded the summer. And we had Larry Guyot's case, and we had a Bob Moses case, and we had a few other small cases and so forth. But the last night, I'm getting ready to go, and everybody knows I'm leaving next morning on the Freedom plane, which was, as you know, that was the one jet out of, and suddenly the lights come on, and I get pulled over, and one of the local cops, it wasn't Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin, what the hell was his name? Had this marvelous
presidential first name.
Presidential first name. John Quincy, John Adams, something, John, and he pulls me over, and I say, John Quincy, what are you doing here? What's this for? And he says, well, I just wanted to wish you good luck, appreciated you being here, and I just wanted to be sure, the chief wanted to be sure you got to your motel okay. They were delighted to see me go, but they wanted to see me go in one piece. And there was, you know, one of the great untold stories, one of the untold stories, I don't know if it's great, the number of people, because I was white, and because I was professional, you know, I met a lot, doctors, lawyers, others, who were in great agony, who knew that their society had to change, knew that blacks had been oppressed. But the White Citizens Council had such a grip on that state that they could not speak out. I had one lawyer in Jackson invited me to lunch. He was the son of a United States Senator. And we chatted, and I'd met him once before at a party. I had no idea who he was, and we got into a 1-hour debate. On my way out of the party, I said, that was a very bright guy. Who was it? I'm told he was senator, somebody's son. I said, oh, so, you know, damn. So we get done with lunch, and he turns to me and he said, Jack, I'll just tell you this. If you get in trouble, I can't represent your cause. I can't represent your people, but I'll represent you. Totally unsolicited. But a kind of an example. Another one in Hattiesburg, which Hattiesburg it was a fun, fascinating town. I mean, Arthur Lillefeld may have been hit there, but the sheriff, Bud Gray, in Hattiesburg, went on the radio and said the people that did this will report to my office at noon on Friday, and they did. I mean, you know, and he made a decision early on that in his county there wasn't going to be any violence unless he ordered it. You know? And there wasn't. You know, and if you did it over against his best wishes. But I got to meet with him and over time, and we were there a long time.
I'm wondering about the notorious poster boy sheriff, so to speak, for Mississippi that year, our Sheriff Rainey and his deputy Price were involved in the murders of Goodman, Shorter, and Cheney, and yet there were a number of other sheriffs. I met with one, Charlie Capps, and some of the others who were not integrationists by any means, but they
They were law and order.
They were law and order.
They were-
Did you have any other meetings with sheriffs that
Oh, yeah.
Well-
The sheriff in Greenwood, you know, when I was getting these people out of, trying to get to 57, and, you know, I finally got a run around for about half a day, and then I finally sat down with them and showed them the bonds, and we talked, etc. And, you know, I got the guys out of the parchment in the afternoon, got these other people out at night, then I'm short 2 people. I'm supposed to have 57, I only have 55. So, where are the other 2? So I get in the car, drive out into the country where the sheriff's house is. They tell me how to get there. And I pull up in his driveway after dark, knock on the door. His wife comes. I introduce myself. He invites me in. You know, can I get you a drink? Some lemonade, sure, fine, right? We chat. He tells me where the 2 girls are. He says, I'll make the phone call. They're in the city jail. I've forgotten why. And you can get them. And then his trustee comes in, and Leroy or whatever, you know, and he introduces him, this civil rights lawyer, and he says, now Leroy, have I been good to you? Yes, sir, boss. You know, all these years. Leroy, you know, did I take care of you when you had pneumonia? Yes, sir. When your daddy died, did I buy a suit of clothes for him? Yes, sir, boss. You know, and it was clear to me when you hear this, that this guy was an exact replica of the paternal attitude towards blacks at its best, in the sense of, you know, I have a responsibility for this man's life and the life of his family. Very strange to us Northerners, but
Yes.
but it was very much, you know. And the Sheriff Gray, one night when we were bored, we went to Golden Gloves in Hattiesburg. Really dumb thing to have done. I mean, there were a whole bunch of half-drunk Mississippians in the place. The sheriff sees us walking. There were 3 of us, another lawyer, Van Hoffman and I. The sheriff sees us walk in, and you could almost see his face drop. He comes over and invites us to go sit at ringside next to him, putting his own reputation on the line, telling everybody behind us, you know, I don't know what's going on, and gee, this is nice, you know, telling everybody behind us, you know, you guys have to leave him alone. And after about the second bout, the doctor, who was the ringside doctor, says, let's get a drink. And as you know, Mississippi's a dry state, so we said sure. So we go out, supposedly to his car to get a drink, and he drives us to his house. Now, if there was any major disasters in that fight for the rest of the night, I don't know who took care of them, but we sat down and had a 2-hour conversation with this doctor about this, you know, what it meant to be in Mississippi. With clergy, you know, I would go to church on Sunday because it was the right thing to do, and I'd meet the clergy, and they all knew who I was because I was on television and this and that, and you'd have some fascinating conversations.
What would they say? I've often wondered how clergy justified Jim Crow.
They don't justify it. They suffer under it. I mean, that's essentially what I learned is that you know, I got a job here. I got a wife. I got 3 kids. I got to do college. I got this. I got the trustees over here, and you know, I can. Those churches which were deeply connected with the North, such as the Episcopal Church and the Methodist Church, had a more difficult time because they're getting all the pressure coming down from their headquarters in terms of integration, and they're all part of the National Council of Churches, and so they're paying my salary, and I'm, you know, doing all this stuff innocent. But they're captives. I mean, so much of the white Mississippi was captive that you didn't get to see. There were plenty of those that didn't feel at all captive. I don't want to overstate it, but and not just in Mississippi. I mean, in every southern city I went to, you would find folks. Many of the times it would be an old lady who was the aunt something or other of the town, and untouchable. And in St. Augustine, she was the voice of integration, and you know, she was crazy Miss something, Miss Baker, whatever, but everybody loved her, and nobody was going to say anything against her. And of course, the chief and the sheriff and the judges were all doing crazy things, but you know, it was fascinating.
At the end of Freedom Summer, you went to Atlantic City.
Did.
And we talked. And then what? What
Well,
for you after that?
as Taylor Branch says in his book, the night that they voted not to reject the deal, I went out and got drunk. I do remember that. And I knew that my time there was, pretty much limited. So I made some connections and went to work. At that point, Martin had just received the Nobel Prize, and he had agreed to do a six-city tour for voter registration, nonpartisan, right? All of which was arranged by the Democratic National Committee. And so Walter Fauntleroy, who was an SCLC minister in Washington, and I became the two advance men. And he took 3 cities, and I took 3 cities. And we did that through the election. And
can you describe what it was like to travel with King?
It was it was a circus. I mean, you'd start with a schedule. And by the time you got done with the schedule, there were so many additions to it. Well, we'll just put this in, we'll just put that in, and it was just almost impossible to keep on schedule. And he either got very much ahead because something got canceled. There was many things canceled. You'd go there and it was very haphazard. But in Cleveland, for example, we were going to be 15 minutes ahead of where we were supposed to be. So I had the caravan pull over, and there was this little old school right there near the hub section of Cleveland. And the principal came out. She figured out because we had police cars and escort, that it was Dr. King, and asked him if he'd go in and speak. And forgot whether it was Bayard or whoever, Bernard Lee. So we don't have time. So King gets out of the car, goes into the school. It's this ancient, 150-year-old school, and gives this magnificent talk. There's no auditorium, so the kids are sitting, it's an octagonal thing. They're sitting in the stairs and on the floor, and 15-minute extemporaneous speech, just beautiful. And then we go on. And Los Angeles, we got so far behind that he finally said, I can't make a speech he's supposed to give at Los Angeles City College. So we get there, and there are 15,000 people in those stands waiting to hear Dr. King, and it starts to rain. And there's no Dr. King. And so I forgot whether Bernard or Bayard, somebody gets up and says, Dr. King can't be here today, but here's Jack Pratt. And 15,000 students start to get up, and I say, what the hell are you here for? And, just to hear somebody or to think about what it means to be an American citizen, the right to vote. So they sat down. So we did about 15 minutes or so, and finally, we got through it, jumped in the car. There was supposed to be this great big reception with thousands of dollars spent on canopies and this. We roared that out of there. I mean, it was just, in Baltimore, it was just mobbed, totally mobbed. And there was no way to get the cars through. I mean, you just inched your way. Security, always a problem. We had no idea of all the phone taps and everything Hoover had on them, and I guess on the rest of us.
Yeah, probably. And then on into 65, you were in Selma, as I understand.
Then in 65, well, I actually went to Selma in 63, and then came back at the very end. I happened to be in the hospital with pneumonia when the Selma broke, and my boss went to the White House, Bob Spike, and helped write that speech that ends with "We shall overcome." And they would read it to me on the phone, and I'd suggest it. So and I just, I didn't want to miss it, so I flew and picked up A. Philip Randolph at the airport, and we went and were part of the final drive to the Catholic meeting spot, and then the march into town. And A. Philip and I walked about a quarter of a mile, and I'd have my car parked there. Then we drove to the Capitol, and just the two of us were sitting on the dais for about an hour, and probably not the two most beloved people on the state capitol steps. And these state legislators would come out guffawing, making rather crude jokes. And then the march came over the hill. If you know Montgomery, there's a crest over here, and then there's a dip, and then the Capitol here. And it started to come, and it came. and it came, and it gets to the right at the edge, and then it starts spilling out into all the side, and it keeps coming. And to hear the tone of these legislators as the size of it and the enormity and the reality that Montgomery cannot be the same ever again. It was an incredible moment.
What then did you go on to? When
I
did
then went to, well, in the church, by that time, a couple of things. I mean, the split between SNCC and SCLC had come down. Black power was rising, but also the movement was moving north. The Civil Rights Bill had been passed. Our role in the South was relatively minimal. They were going to get the vote. They were getting the vote by that time. They were going to begin making changes, as you said in your talk. Vast numbers suddenly of blacks elected for the first time, and so we began to sense that there's as much to do in the northern cities as there is in the South. And right after Selma, Los Angeles rioted.
Right.
And so I went out with a delegation to the National Council to meet with community leaders, the governor and the mayor, churchmen, to see what could be done. And what you realized is that they were as ignorant of race and racial relations at the highest levels of government and of the church in Southern California as they were anywhere else. So they created a commission on church and race, and 3 months later they invited me to come out and run it, so I went out there and ran it for the next 3 years, until finally the Black Power people came one day and said, "We don't need you anymore." And of course by that time Vietnam had arisen, so it was a relatively easy movement. And in answer to the question which you asked to the kids earlier, of where did the participation lead you? I would say that the large number of both students and clergy and lawyers that were in Mississippi transferred into the anti-Vietnam movement within 2 or 3 years, and were much of the backbone of that movement in the rural areas.
And many into the women's movement as well.
Well, and of course, the civil rights led to the women's movement. Women's movement led to the gay rights movement. I mean, you can. It's a very clear line. And in my opinion, one of the reasons that if you look at the voting records of the United States today, I know this is partisan, but white males vote reactionary by a huge amount.
Especially in the South. But not
And,
just,
but well, I mean nationally, in Nebraska, etc. And you ask why, and my answer is because there was no men's movement. Men did not get sensitized. Women did. Gays did. They became aware of who they were, what their potential was, their emotions, etc. This didn't happen to males, and to this day, they are lost souls. We are lost souls.
That's what do you think the lessons? That's the legacy of Freedom Summer. What you're talking about earlier. What about the lessons of Freedom Summer? What can it teach us today?
Well, the racism, in my opinion, is far deeper. The legacy is bone of our bone, and if we don't begin with that understanding, we can be the most pretending nation in the world but I hear myself, I've been in this movement, I hear myself saying things that are either sexist or racist or homophobic, almost daily, normally to myself, not out loud. And I hear it, and where does this come from? And then I remember, my father, who had an epithet for everybody, right? I mean, the Italians were this, the French were that, etc. And and he got it from there, and he got it. So we have just so much farther to go before there is the kind of racial freedom, and it will not take place until the educational system gets straightened out, and that won't take place until the housing situation in the country gets straightened out, and we are not really moving to straighten the housing system. We're becoming more segregated, which means the northern schools in this country are as segregated today as they were in the 60s. I remember very early saying the South will integrate far faster and far better